Where's the... Okay, where's my sheet?
There.
Okay, we'll just okay, so we're item 5, page 6, confirmation of council open minutes for the 13th of December, moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Gary.
Oh, I was just going to second that.
Okay, all those for, any against, carried unanimously. So item 6, page 17, confirmation of elected member briefing notes from the 13th of December 2018, moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Just a comment for debate on that one. I think it's very appropriate that these are included. Thank you, democracy. All those for, any against, carried unanimously. We're now moving to item 9, page 31. So we'll hand over to Deborah Stanbarton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by introducing ourselves. I'm Deborah Stanbarton. I'm the REAP project coordinator, in case you didn't know. Lachlan Muldowney, who is the council barrister, who was on the task force which provided oversight to the project, and Luke O'Dwyer, city planning manager. I'd also like to convey apologies from Peter Skilton, who was the external project advisor on this project. Fortunately, he's not able to be here today. I'd also like to point out a small correction. Paragraph 20 in the report, the changes recommended for the simple plan change, it should say para 13B rather than 12B. My apologies. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's in paragraph 14, paragraph 15, and paragraph 18.
Thank you.
No sweat.
Elected members, I'll take the report as read, and we are all here happy to answer any of your questions.
Councillor Siggy.
Mayor Andrew, look at page 35, right at the top, general residential zone. You talk about enable up to 3 residential units per site as permitted activity. What kind of units are they? What do they look like?
So this could be any combination of detached dwellings. You could have 3 detached dwellings on a site, or you could have a duplex and 1 dwelling on a site.
Okay, depending on the size of the site and everything.
Absolutely.
Okay, and I was just a little bit confused about number 18, the rezone lot 2 DP, whatever, special natural zone road to Kauri. And what are you going to change that into?
Luke, if you wouldn't mind covering that.
Oh, yeah, sorry, paragraph 18, yeah. And it's the second, within the paragraph 18, the second paragraph. You say the new purpose of the site does not align with the district plan zoning and needs to be changed.
It's just to...
Into what?
Excuse me. It's just to give effect to decisions that have already made, that this council and previous councils have made in relation to land that council owns at Waiwhakariki. It's just to change the zoning there. It's a tidy up.
Yep. So at the moment, the district plan doesn't have it zoned as was it heritage as the natural heritage. This will tidy that up and make sure it is. So,
oh, I see. Yep. Okay, cool. Thank you. No. No. Thank you.
Councillor Angela.
My questions, I'll give you an example, but my questions relate to the recommendation suitable for a simple plan change on page 35. There's not a lot of detail there as to the effects, whether they're significant or not, and the outcomes that those changes will relate to. And an example of that is what Councillor Henry has just said. So at the bottom bullet point on page 32 under 15, where it does say enable apartments as restricted discretionary activities, yada, 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 where the site adjoins, etc., the main stem of the Waikato River or Lake Rotorua. So what, if any, impact would that, could that have on the river plan, the future plans for the river plan, the future plans for the ferry bank
Sure.
site, etc.?
So this is in reference to privately owned residential general property. It's not about council-owned property. The development standards that apply to apartments in those zones are the same as for dwellings. It's just the density is a bit tweaked. So if you can do a dwelling there, what we're saying, rather than apartments being discretionary, which they are now, we're just bringing that back to restricted discretionary with un-high-density standards.
So back onto that table of changes that you're recommending on page 35, one of the changes to the general residential zone is to enable up to 3 residential units per site as a permitted activity.
Correct.
Is it 3 residential units now?
Apartments do not count as residential units. Sorry, I thought that's what you were going to be asking me. 1 residential unit on a site and plus an ancillary flat are permitted currently.
So what is the effect of that change? In layman's terms, if there's a house that's going to be demolished next door to someone, what can happen there now, and what's this change going to enable to happen?
What can happen there now with a resource without a resource consent, assuming that you comply with all of the standards, you can build 1 house plus an ancillary flat as a permitted activity. What we are recommending here is that you can build up to 3 houses, so that's 1 more than the house in the ancillary flat, or a house and a duplex.
So isn't that a significant change?
We already enable that as a restricted discretionary activity. We're only saying subject to standards, you can do it as a permitted activity.
So you change, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. The second bullet point under there, and I'm sorry to labour the point here, but there is, my concern is that, I'm on the same page, Gary, 35, is that the process from here is we sign this off, you go away and you do a couple of things, one of them being a plan change, then that's out of our hands. It goes to commissioners.
What will, perhaps Luke can discuss this in more detail. What we are asking you to do is to authorize us to prepare a plan change. Once that plan change is done, once that plan change is prepared and some consultation goes on, it is brought back to you with the very fine detail of exactly what is being recommended when we come to ask you to authorize notification of that plan change.
Okay, so at that point, we will be able to talk and discuss all of the effects, if any, of each individual recommendation that you're putting forward. Okay.
Correct.
So just one last question then, because I'm happy with that. Down the bottom, I'm just looking midway under signs.
Yes.
Simplify temporary signage rules. Now, obviously, there's an election this year, and the election rules around signs fit under the temporary rules.
Correct.
Will that have any effect on this election, time-wise?
I don't believe so, because
Okay.
I don't think we will be far enough through the
Yeah.
process.
All right, great, thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. On page 32, paragraph 7, the last sentence says they do not change the direction of the district plan. Our district plan doesn't have directions. It has principles and objectives and
It
things
has
like that.
outcomes, the direction
Yeah.
that the plan is moving.
So that's not a, there's no such thing as direction of a district plan.
What I was trying to say in that sentence is the objectives and policies of the plan stand as they are. This plan change doesn't attempt to change the direction.
So it doesn't change the policies or objectives?
No, that's correct. There are a couple of objectives where we've tweaked a couple of words just to make it clear. But in our research, nobody has raised any issues with the existing objectives.
But bear in mind, it was very much precluded as a part of the REAP scope, not to go and challenge the policies
all
and
little
objectives.
stuff.
Yeah, this is about streamlining and making things easier within the current context of
Correct.
those policies and
Remember that.
objectives.
Thank you. On page 35, the third bullet point down talks about amending the definition of residential units, clarify kitchen and bedroom sink provision. That all echoes a little bit of SUIPs. Does that have any implication on that?
That is a rating issue. What this deals with is the district plan, which is slightly different.
Yeah.
And this will have to be looked at as part of the rating issue. But people in their designs have now been putting small sinks in their bedrooms. It's not been clear.
Which I think has been triggering.
Yep.
I understand the difference, but
Oh,
so people say, okay, there's a sink, okay, that is
Yep.
now a separately used, whatever SUIP means again, I have to get, what does it mean? Separately
No, I'm a planner, I don't know.
something, property is something usable property.
Separately used and habitable part of the property.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so, and that's causing some angst out in the community by some people. So this won't,
This does not deal with that issue.
Okay,
in
so-
terms of rating. This just deals with, through the district plan, whether or not it is considered to be a self-contained unit or not. And we want to make the distinction very clear because we have people arguing, well, I'm just putting a sink in the bedroom. It depends whether it is self-contained. You can carry out all the, you can live in a unit without having regress to the rest of the house. So this just makes it clear that, yes, if you choose to have a sink in your bedroom, that's fine with us, as long as it is not a self-contained unit.
and that's a totally different, decision's the wrong word, totally different scenario than someone else coming across and say, hey, I'm the rates collector. Because you have got that sink in your bedroom, we will now categorise that as a SUIP. We want $500 a year off you
It's a
for that.
separate
So,
issue. Yeah.
okay. So it's the status quo, in fact.
Well, it's clarifying, the plan is quite silent about this, so it was quite difficult for developers, quite difficult for council to determine in any particular, when you were looking at plans for development, well, is this apartments? Is this a house? What exactly is this for planning purposes?
Okay, so one council employee goes out there with some hat,
Well, we don't go out
a
there,
district
but
plan
yeah.
hat, and says, yep, you can put that in there. Another council employee goes out there with a different hat called Mr. Rate Collector, and he'll say, oh, that's going to trigger after the
And we
phase
need
in
to
time.
make sure
Okay.
that people understand the
Yeah,
differences
yeah,
between
okay.
these things and what you may be required to do to comply with different bits of regulation. Correct. But this plan change only deals with the district plan.
Okay, thank you. And whilst there may be flow-on impacts to people's rates.
We need to ensure that people understand the
Understand what- yeah.
consequences.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I've just got a couple of questions. Is there a minimal section size for allowing up to 3 units on a section?
Well, for our recommendation, one of the things that we're looking at is reducing, the current section size in the general residential for a single dwelling is 400 square meters per dwelling. We are looking at reducing that to 300 per dwelling.
But there are some sections around town that are actually smaller than 400 at the moment, aren't there?
Different zoning, they
Okay,
will,
all right.
or a different type of development. Duplexes require 200 per unit, but that's
Okay.
different to a detached house.
All right. Yeah, page 35.2 there, simplifying and flexibility in development. And I've talked to the CE about this before in regards to infill housing. Want to see if there's any sort of insurance or assurance you can give us that in areas where heritage housing is, that the suitable designs will be looked at to fit in with established housing in there. Is this all part of that?
So within the district plan, we have heritage areas and we have heritage buildings. What we're proposing here doesn't affect those. This is just the general residential for areas that have not been identified as heritage.
Okay. So, yeah, I'm just, I just want some sort of assurance that just no, ordinary concrete boxes are going to be put in amongst areas where,
Well, there are rules for those areas that deal with appearance and construction.
okay. Thank you.
Mark?
Thank you, Deborah, for the report, and thank you for your time explaining it too. I appreciate that. I just got a couple of quick questions for clarity. The one on signs, on page 35, the electronic signs in the Ruakura, when you say an electronic sign, are you talking like a big Hamilton East type billboard there? Or?
Yes, to some degree, and this provide for, it looks like it was an omission for that area. So we're just putting in the same electronic sign provisions that you have in industrial areas.
So they're in all other areas
Yeah.
already? Okay, cool,
Yeah.
thank you. The earthworks one, amending existing policy to state minimise adverse effect on the existing landforms, etc. Now, what was the original wording in that? Do you remember off the top of your head?
I can find it for you, just a moment.
Where I'm heading for with this one, Deborah, is to get you to define minimise.
Sure.
Just, I think it was something that you're not allowed to mess with the existing landscape, is that right?
What the current rule said, and excuse me while I just find it here. The current, it's a policy change. The current policy says earthworks and vegetation removal shall occur in a way that maintains natural character and amenity value by retaining existing landforms, natural features, and significant vegetation.
Yep.
The problem with that is when you are doing a full-scale subdivision, you are going to be changing the landform to some degree.
Right.
So what we are trying to say in that is we recognize that there will be, in some cases, some change, but we want to minimize that change. We
Yep.
don't want you to fill all the gullies. We don't want you to knock down all of the significant vegetation. But in terms of what significant is, that's always a really tough thing, and it's within the context of that particular application.
Right, so do we have some parameters around that term minimise?
Well, Lachlan, perhaps you can talk about what minimize mean.
Yeah.
Do as little as possible.
You're right, but I mean, to a developer, as little as possible is probably quite different to
And,
someone
that,
who loves.
and that's the purpose of the consent,
Yeah.
is it allows council to get in and make a judgment on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's pretty much it. Thank you. Yep, that's fine for me. Thank you.
Okay, moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We'll go to debate. Councillor Mark.
Thank you. Probably supporting this. Thank you, Deborah, for your patience in walking me through this. It's a big one. I'm comfortable that this is a way of making the plan more easy to exact rather than changing the plan. I will use this opportunity to flag again. I worry about the excessive infill in the outer suburbs. To me, it just doesn't make sense when the infill should be in the centre of town. I realise that the infrastructure implications will be taken into account when you're doing this, and that's obviously part of the brief. But it's my job to keep a higher level view on that, and I will state that my view has long been built up, not out. But having said that, I'm very comfortable with the work you've done on this. Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to the board to vote.
I'm going to have to reset, sorry. Can you see them on the screen? Martin, have you voted?
Yeah.
Yep.
Can I vote now?
Yep. Motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, Deborah. You've done a lot of work on this over a long time, so appreciate it. Item 10, page 37. Jamie. So we'll take the report as read. Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, happy with that. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, moved by myself, seconded. Yeah, moved by myself, seconded by Deputy Mayor, Councillor Angela. Councillor Angela.
Just a question on page 60. Under definitions 3 aircraft, should we include drones in that as well?
This came up at the briefing in November. Council's, the position of staff is that we have some guidelines in relation to drone use in the city, that those guidelines are up on Council's website and are working well. So the position is kind of BAU in terms of that we haven't included drones to make that something that needs to be enforced under the bylaw. We think it's been effectively managed as it is.
So there's no risk of someone operating a drone in one of our parks where not that we have, we have one bylaw officer, I think, don't we? There's complaints and staff go up to them and they're on a park and they say they've got a licence, but they've been a nuisance. You're confident that that's managed through?
There are general provisions in the bylaw that would apply to nuisance or impeding other people's use or enjoyment of the park.
But whatever you're talking about that manages drones is not a policy or a bylaw because it hasn't come through this council. So is it enough for us to confiscate, prosecute? I'm just, that other cities are having significant issues with this. I'm just wondering if we're missing an opportunity to not include it here. But if
it hasn't been included because it's not an issue that we're facing in terms of our complaints.
Yeah.
Yep. I guess this is an opportunity to consult with the public through the proposed bylaw. If it is an issue that they raise through that process, then it's something that can be revisited when we come back to you.
Okay, so perhaps if I ask a question differently, if we include, because I've never seen hovercraft on a park, if we included drones in here, would there be any adverse effect to including it in the bylaw?
I guess it would be an enforcement and feasibility consideration around how we would look at that and what that permit process would look like and the administrative.
But it would be no different to hot air balloons or gliders or hovercraft now, surely?
I guess the difference would be that if we make it unlawful in our bylaw that every person that wants to fly a drone on our park would need to come to us to obtain a permit, which would have some costs and administrative matters associated with it.
Okay, so we're comfortable then, or you're comfortable then, that to fly a drone you have to, as my understanding, you have to apply or submit a flight plan, so that people still have to do that if they're operating that drone from one of our parks?
No, we've given approval through our guidelines online that people can use their drones from certain parks, but there are the civil aviation rules that are separate to council, that are not enforced by council, that apply.
Yeah.
We've got some general guidance there to not fly over sports games, to not fly in proximity to playgrounds, so forth, and there's some parks where we steer them away from.
Okay, all right. And just second question, just on page 64, under 5.4, 5.4.2D, does workmen you've got workmen, employees, agents, consultants, etc. Does workmen mean contractors, or does that council staff?
I think it's a catch-all there. I guess this is where the don't touch things if they're kind of not broken approach has been taken in terms of our review of this, but
Can that be changed to contractors?
we've got consultants in there, but we can clear that section up quite easily.
Otherwise, I'm not sure what workmen
It applies to, sure, noted.
And then it's also on page 65 as well, and under D. Yeah. That's all, thank you.
Councillor Mark.
Just a few to rake up here. While we're on the aircraft one, I noticed 8.8.1, except in the cases of emergencies or where permission has been obtained, no one shall basically land on a park. I'm interested in the balloons issue, because when those guys take off during a mass ascension or whatever, they land in pretty much any park. Are you suggesting here now that they have to get a permit to land in any park, or what's the clarity on that? Because if they come down, they don't often choose where they come down.
Sure. I guess this has been a clause that's always been in the bylaw. The bylaw's been around for a long time, so I guess it hasn't, as far as I'm aware, impeded any of that balloon activity.
Yeah. But so is there any point in having it there? Because if they're going to land where they're going to land, and they won't have written to us and asked if they can, is it worth actually having that in there at all? Or can you exempt balloons?
We could look at how pragmatic that clause is.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
well, I'm just sort of thinking this. What this does is give someone a right to complain if a balloon's landed in a park near them, because of the bylaw that they're actually breaking, and it can be an impediment to them if it only takes 1 or 2 complaints. And
Sure.
yeah, so yeah, if we could have another look at it, I'd be grateful.
Yep.
8.3, the page before, on page 70. Just looking at your vehicles on parks, etc. You've defined, or you said motorised there, but we're in the area now of e-bikes and Lime scooters. Are they considered motorised vehicles, or would we be better to say registered motorised vehicles?
I would consider that motorised vehicle.
Motorised vehicles,
If it's motorised, I think we'll just have to reflect on our definitions to make sure that's absolutely the case. But
yeah, I'm just thinking, so if someone took a Lime scooter on a park, they're technically breaking the rules. Is that right?
yes.
Okay. Could we maybe have a closer look at that, just regards, because a motorised vehicle is a pretty slow vehicle now, and should we decide to put a speed limit on it, it's really not going to be, I mean, the spirit of this is obviously people aren't going to get mown down by people in go-karts and motorbikes, but the motorised vehicle now is becoming a slower, more pedestrian-paced vehicle. And I'm thinking perhaps of mobility scooters as well. Would they be?
They're not, they're exempt. You can absolutely use those on a park, yep.
Okay, so you're not worried that the Lime scooters and e-bikes are going to be wrapped up in that? Because bikes are exempt, right? Except where it says no cycling.
Yeah, I guess the electric cycling thing is something we better cover off to make sure we know where we stand on that one.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, cool. The page 68, the fireworks one. So no one can let off any fireworks in a park without council permission. Was there no law before this? That's a new one, eh?
The bylaw, as it was previously, was a little unclear there, and it was something that came up at the briefing.
Yeah.
And in relation to whether council should be a bit more permissive in terms of letting the community light fireworks from public land or from reserves, and we've looked at that, and I guess the advice from staff would be that this potentially creates a public liability issue if it was proven that we approved public use and then that caused an issue, then it could potentially come back on us.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, thank you. 6.9, advertising on parks, page 66. Can I take it where it says no person shall within the limits of any park expose or otherwise display or attempt to expose ads, graffitis or decorations, etc. I'm trying to think of the situation where if you've got like a Children's Day and you've got a sponsor and they've got a teardrop flag, say Mitre 10 have sponsored something to that effect. Effectively what we're saying here is they actually have to apply to us before they can even put that teardrop flag up, or a radio station comes down, or and puts the Teviot flag up there. Is this, is that net a little bit too tight?
That type of thing would be covered under the application for the event on the park themselves, so those kinds of questions would be asked, and if it was reasonable and if it was temporary, then in terms of the bylaw, then we wouldn't have any issue with it. I guess there are other rules that apply sometimes to things under your district plans and so forth, so as long as everything was compliant, we definitely take a pragmatic approach to those types of things. I guess some of these things are here as to deal with the exceptions to the rule and to make it just a trigger to people to ensure that they do come and talk to us around doing things on parks.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, like, for example, the Colgate Games, they had all the tents and they all had logos and stuff on them. Technically, they'd be breaking the rules unless they'd all... Or do they have to list to us what those signs are going to be, or...
Not when we're talking about a temporary event, no.
Okay, thank you. Cool. And regards the Freedom Camping one, that's my last question. So have we is Porritt the only place that people can freedom camp in Hamilton?
On parks, yes.
On parks?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Where else?
The traffic bylaw manages freedom camping on our roads, and I believe you can stay on any, a caravan type motorhome can stay up to 3 consecutive nights in any unrestricted car parking spot.
Okay. All right. So at Porritt, is there signage that says how long they can stay for?
Yes, there is signage.
It's all clearly marked out. Great. Thank you. Appreciate your indulgence.
Councillor Gary.
This is freedom camping also. The maps I found very difficult. So, and maybe you've just answered it because what you've just said with Mark, that the only place you can freedom camp, so the pink and the green is irrelevant. There's something called prohibited and something called restricted. Well, I thought those sound very much the same. So the only place in Hamilton, well, only park in Hamilton you can freedom camp at is Porritt Stadium.
Correct.
Okay, so no other park you can do that. So what's the difference between prohibited and restricted?
So the restricted is part of the amendments to the new bylaw, that restricted section or category has been removed based on legal advice.
It's being removed?
Correct.
Okay, so I'm ignorant of it, the current legislation. So at the moment we have some places where it's prohibited, some places where it's restricted, and restricted I assume means you can only stay there for only so many and can only stay there for so much time. There will be no restricted, there will only be prohibited.
Sorry, there will be restricted, which means restricted in terms of how you can use it. So that's self-contained vehicle as opposed to just putting your tent up.
Oh, okay.
So that's the difference there. Okay. There was an intended restricted category in the I guess the current bylaw that we've looked at removing based on legal advice that Freedom Camping Act doesn't actually provide for that type of category.
Okay, for example, on page 55, there's quite a few, I guess you'd call it mauve or pink or something, colours there. They're all parks, I assume, which on which it is prohibited to freedom camp.
Correct.
Okay, and all right. Okay, that's reasonably clear. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Chair, and thank you for the report. My question here with the Parks and Domains Reserves bylaw is, do we actually need it? Because, and the reason I say that is because we find it hard to enforce other bylaws. We've got like the Safety in Public Places bylaw for begging, and most of the offences listed listed there for city parks, because a park is a public place, is covered by police anyway under the Arms Act, Crimes Act, Summary Offences Act, Land Transport and Civil Aviation, which covers everything. So if the police can't deal with it, I would find it quite hard to believe that council could deal with it. So my question is, do we need all these bylaws? Because in my experience, bylaws don't usually work.
I could speak to the kind of parks component of that, and if Ricky wants to add anything in terms of bylaws in general, he's welcome to. I guess the bylaw is the tool that our council has in terms of guiding how we expect people to behave on parks and the type of, and where they need to seek permission and so forth. So it's an educational tool first and foremost, but in terms of whether we really need it or not, it's there to ensure that we do have the option to prosecute if for a really severe infringement that we may not if we didn't have it. So acknowledge that there are always challenges in terms of enforcement that and the different aspects of enforcement, but we believe that yes, it is required and it does add value.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree that the bylaw there with freedom camping is needed because we're just catching up with most of the rest of New Zealand now with that. But I just question the other stuff. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Siggy.
And thank you for the report. Look, just following on actually from Councillor Casson, what other mechanisms would we actually have to enforce anything if we don't have a bylaw? Do we have any other mechanisms?
Could I just jump in here as the GM? It's about intent. So if we don't have any bylaws, so are then we flagging our intent is that people can do anything they like on parks outside of, you know, the criminal sort of side of things that the police get involved in. So I think it's quite important that we talk about intent. It's not always about enforcement, as Jamie says, and quite often there's, you know, self-regulating type things and just intent and it's educative too, so that, you know, we don't run out and take prosecutions willy-nilly and that sort of thing, but we do have it there as a last resort backstop. And I know, and I understand I get what you're saying around bylaws, you know, be difficult to enforce and that sort of thing, but I think it's more about intent from council about what we are philosophically happy to happen on our parks and what we don't want to happen on our parks.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Sorry, can we just go back to, you know, the definition of an aircraft? You took me with the drones one again. So what, just in summary, can you just, what are our current bylaws or legislation that affect drones?
I'm not an absolute expert on everything drone related, but in terms of how it's been approached in this bylaw is that it hasn't been explicitly included in terms of it being an unlawful or kind of need for permitted, for a permit type approach. So we're relying on the guidelines and the information that's available on Council's website in terms of how people use and operate drones on our parks. And as far as, I mean, we're aware it's working.
Follow up, whether it's through Angela's committee, I'm not sure where this might sit, but, you know, I'm thinking hypothetically, operating drones over Lake Domain and the river area, that is right next to the Waikato Hospital rescue helicopter landing pad. So obviously, you know, you have balloons. When you have balloons over Waikato, there'll be clear permits to ensure that the rescue helicopter has unimpeded access in and out of the hospital. So I'm just trying to work out, so there's some sort of critical safety issues. Obviously, near an airport, I get that's totally covered by legislation. We read that overseas. But I think it's a discussion that should be had because obviously playgrounds, if someone starts to actually photograph playgrounds, there's got to be context why that's happening. So I'm just trying to work through and seek guidance as to whether or not we should have some, whether it's one of our briefing sessions, whether we should actually get our heads around more what regulations cover drones and where we fit or where we don't. And I apologise because I confess that my sort of personal knowledge of what is allowed around drones is somewhat limited, and I think there are issues that while you're still in a public space, there are issues of individual privacy and intrusion as well. There are clear safety issues when we look at the use of rescue helicopters in and out of that DHB. And I apologise for not having the knowledge, and I think it would be useful so that all I'm saying is that we've got definition of aircraft, right? But it would be probably really useful to make sure that we're clear and concise around that particular type of aerial mobile device.
I mean, we can definitely come back to a briefing, or someone, the appropriate staff member could come back to a briefing and talk drones if there's some desire there.
It may be that the legislation and all of our bylaws are totally adequate, all right? and it may be just a drop-in session, but I think we should actually be crystal clear that is the case, in my view, through the chair.
We can do a briefing on drones.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Councillor Robb.
Thank you, Chair. Just on freedom camping, are we legally obliged to provide spaces in the city for freedom camping?
That's the intent of the Freedom Camping Act, yep. So that there's no blanket prohibition, but you need to assess the public land in terms of its appropriateness. There's criteria in the Freedom Camping Act itself, but essentially whether it presents an issue in terms of public health and safety, accessibility, protection of ecological significance.
But must we have a space, at least one space in the city for that purpose? Under that Freedom Camping Act?
My interpretation of the Act, or understanding of the Act, is that it doesn't say you must have space,
Okay.
but you must assess your space to make that determination.
Okay. Do we monitor the use of, in this case, Porritt Stadium for use by the Freedom Camping Group?
More anecdotally, we have ground staff that are based at Porritt, so we get a lot of information fed through from them.
Yep. And do they comply with all of the, you know, I mean, I'm looking at this obviously going forward into the new bylaw, but do they comply with all the requirements? You know, read in here that there's a need to have a special certificate of fitness, you know, or some certificate that says it's self-contained and so forth. Do we have issues around compliance and rubbish that they leave behind, that they don't leave in the right spots and so forth?
I'm not aware of any issues in terms of rubbish or the actual use of that park. We do get the odd person that doesn't necessarily comply with being a self-contained unit, but it's not a major issue that I'm aware of.
Okay. I've just read about it being quite a major issue in some other parts of over the summer period. My other question is, I mean, this is a real complex, you know, there's lots of bylaws, lots of rules in here, and this question might best be directed to the CE, but I appreciate Lance's earlier comments about not wanting to prosecute any and everyone who breaches a bylaw, but are we resourced sufficiently to enforce this bylaw in areas where we need to enforce it? You know, we provide a whole bunch of freedoms around what people can and can't do, and that comes at a cost, obviously, and that cost is around making sure that we've got the resources there to take action when it's necessary to do so. And I'm thinking here about, you know, the lean and mean organisation that we would like to be. If we go ahead with this and go out to the public and promise this is what the outcome might be if they tick all the boxes, are we then able to go back and approve this and then deliver it?
So on a comment in general, and I'll ask the Deputy Chief Executive to comment specifically regarding the parks bylaw. In general, we take we set bylaws, there's legislative rules and so forth, which again set as intent, and we have some resource in some places for monitoring when we're legislatively required to monitor certain things on a regular basis, like food licences and so forth. We do take a complaints-based approach in some respect on certain things, and we do have a practice of following those up, so we're not geared to enforce every rule that's in place. But one of the good things about having an intent-based approach is it's not only the person using or taking advantage of the council services or community facilities, it's the people in the community that are aware of it as well. And there's a bit of self-policing that goes on, and they make contact to council if they believe that something's happening in a way that's outside of the rules and so forth. So that sort of applies generally across everything, specifically in terms of parks.
Look, I'm confident we've got enough warranted officers, just as Richard said. If we generally do work on complaints and observations from the community and others, which has generally worked quite well. We've got our City Parks team, we've got a number of staff who are out there each and every day on the parks. We've got some grounds people who are actually based on the parks as well. So And we have some sympathetic friends who live next to parks who get on well with our staff, and they're quite good eyes and ears for us too. So I'm reasonably confident. And so the people are warranted do have training, and we make sure our warrants are up to date. And if there's any updates on new things that are happening around drones, or particular nuances to what's happening in other council areas, we do that through various professional associations and things like that. So I'm pretty confident that we have got staff there, but we aren't out there, day in, day out, policing our parks or anything like that.
I wasn't really looking for that. I guess what I'm really saying is what we're offering here to the public by way of consultation. If they say yes, that's what we want, and agree, will we have a budgetary issue around meeting or delivering around what we're promising in this bylaw?
There'll be no additional budgetary issue. I think we're resourced how we are at the moment, incorporating into people's everyday part of their jobs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so it's seconded by Councillor James. Are you okay with that? No, Councillor Leo? Yeah, Councillor Leo, thank you. So all those for, any against? Carried unanimously. Oh, you want to debate? Okay, we'll back that up. Back it up. Okay, Councillor Mark.
Time, there's something that Lance said that really sparked this off, and I wasn't going to speak about it, but on the freedom camping thing, are we being a friendly city or not here? It worries me that we have 6 spots that people can only park in, or that people can freedom camp in our beautiful city. And I would challenge us to open our minds a little bit to this area. Not all freedom campers are freeloading, feces dumping hippies, or dare I say it, unruly tourists. Most of them are really nice people who came here and wanted to see our city. And I just wonder if we aren't providing enough, or I wonder if we are providing enough facilities for them. It's a relevant, massive part of our tourism industry, and granted they don't spend a heck of a lot of money to start with, apologies, but if they have a good experience here, they'll come back when they do have money. And I think this is an opportunity that we may be actually missing by getting ourselves too excited with the recent sort of pitchfork-wielding digital hysteria that was the unruly tourists. So I would suggest that we have a lot of great parks that could be considered for this in a more positive way. And I would suggest we open up in a managed way to more freedom camping, because there are only 6 relevant spots. If we don't have enough, they're going to freedom camp in places they're not allowed to camp in. And I think we've got a lot of great places. Now, I live 250 metres away from the only freedom camping spot at Pirate Stadium, and I've been down and talked with a lot of those people, and they're excellent. I haven't seen a heck of a lot of issue there. I would suggest Dave's house. Oh no, that's not in there. Yeah. Just kidding. I've taken them food before, actually, but that's a whole new story. So I just think perhaps we could be a little bit more friendly with that part of our rules and make them welcome.
37, and we're voting on recommendation 1, and we'll vote on recommendation 2 separately. So all those for? Any against? Carried unanimously. Now recommendation 2, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Leo. All those for? Any against? Carried unanimously. So item 19 now, which is Blair on separate. Thank you very much, Jamie. Thank you, Ricky, for support. Okay, so we'll take the report as read. This is on separate, a separate cover. So we're at item 19, and it's a separate cover on future-proof. Apologies, I did. Sorry, Natasha, we'll take you first. Sorry, Blair, I know you're running down the stairs. Thank you.
Good way to get the guy wound up, eh?
Okay, so just to start on this one, I'm just going to hand over to Councillor Jeff, just to give us a background and bring us up to speed, and then we'll hand over to Natasha if there's anything to add. So we're on, apologies, team, we're on page 131, item 12. Apologies, I jumped that item. Thank you, Jeff.
I'll just give a quick summary and provide some context, and then Natasha can pick up where I left off there. Just wanted to say, if you look at page 134, in terms of reference, at the bottom there, I would just like to quickly report that the task force met for the first time yesterday. Was it yesterday? No, Tuesday. And when you look at number 9 there, we've appointed a deputy chair, and that is Manga Tapora Thompson-Evans as deputy chair, just letting you know that. And we did approve the terms of reference, but obviously aware that it's coming to the council today. So the terms of reference, just in summary, it's relatively broad. The terms of reference is faithful to the original river plan themes that you'll see on page 132. Page 132, number 10 there are the original themes in the river plan. And so our terms of reference is faithful to those. You'll see that those are pretty broad. I guess the other aspect is we've tried to leave it open so that, because things do arise unexpectedly sometimes, and to do its job effectively, we feel the task force needs to be able to have the opportunity to have conversations, explore opportunities as they arise. The key things to remember are, one, all councillors are invited to attend this, the task force, and indeed on Tuesday we had Mango Norm, we had councillors Siggy and councillors Gary there, who all made tangible contributions.
Outstanding.
Yeah, in some cases. You're a member of the task force. Yeah. And the other aspect is that all the recommendations made, of course, in the task force come back to either council or the Councillor Southgate's committee for discussion and approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Natasha.
The report itself is reasonably straightforward, so I'll take it as read, but I would just like to clarify. You've been circulated an updated terms of the reference. They are the same as what was attached to the agenda, and that shows some edits which have come about from conversations after you were circulated for comments. So there's no difference between the two copies that you've likely seen.
Okay, we'll take it as moved by Jeff and seconded, Councillor Jeff, sorry, and seconded by Councillor Ryan. Councillor James.
One question, and I know it's early days, so I apologise if it's a bit early, but the terms or the themes that they're looking at item 10 there, roles of the task force. Will the task force look at path access for the eastern side of the river from the old gunboat through to the existing path in the north to improve river use and enable Hamiltonians to enjoy the whole river? So I see there part of it is improving access to along and across the river. I know it's early days, I'm just wanting to know if that's going to be considered.
I'm happy to respond to that. It actually came up on Tuesday. Deputy Mayor brought that up, and that is something that's coming to, in further detail, to one of our upcoming meetings.
Fantastic.
Thanks, James.
So just to add to that, at this point in time, the most recent task force addressed issues that we're having to respond to in a timely manner right now to inform the annual plan. Staff's recommendation would be that if we need additional funding, we should possibly look at that as part of the 10-year plan, but obviously the task force can guide us in it as it wishes.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. I'm just a little bit concerned about on paragraph, so page 134, paragraph 6, first bullet point, and it seems to clash a bit with paragraph 8. So the first bullet point on paragraph 6 is oversees development and delivery of all river plan projects to progress a cohesive approach whilst prioritising funded projects within agreed budgets. That seems quite, seems to give them quite a bit of delegation. Then it talks under delegation, the task force cannot make any decisions concerning the river plan but is able to make recommendations. So I assume that the point 8 is the accurate position and that the bullet point is a little bit expansive.
It's a clarification where the task force does not have delegation. That's a proposal, but it might within projects that have budgets provide direction. So that's
okay. Okay. Well, that it just needs to be cleared up. Just be a bit clearer to say that, like prioritising funded projects. That means putting one ahead of another, obviously.
Would it be clear if it said with agreed budgets?
It already says within agreed budgets. I just don't know how that squares with cannot make decisions concerning but able to make recommendations.
So the intention is that the work that
Put it this way, I'm comfortable if that first bullet point was deleted or amended, because I'm comfortable with 8. That's how I.
Yep.
That's quite that's articulated as I understand it. That first bullet point seems to expand that delegation beyond what.
So maybe it should be. It should be changed to oversee approved projects. Because that's effectively what approved and funded projects. Yep. And that way, it's no different than what happens now with other items. We make a decision in this council, and then certain councillors get involved in actually helping us formulate the outcomes.
We could just delete the second part of the sentence after.
Okay.
Councillor Jeff, are you happy with that change?
That change again, I suppose the one thing I don't want to lose is the ability to be nimble, and if other opportunities arise that we can look at on behalf of the council and report back, I just don't want to lose that.
This is about effecting guidance on things that have been approved, isn't it? So it's not about stopping you from doing all your other responsibilities, but if it's been approved by council, you guys can jump in and influence and bring that expertise to the table.
I'm happy with that, thank you.
Councillor Ryan?
Sorry. Does that mean that the task force project manages things?
No, that's no different to what happens now with other things, is that there will be councillors will meet and discuss potential opportunities, and if it's within the mandate, it provides direction to staff who are project managing it. But it's got to fit within the original definition and resolution of council.
Okay.
You okay with the change, Councillor Ryan?
I don't think it's material. I think it's just tidying up a bit, So it's hard to say specifically, but I don't think it'll make a material difference on the purpose.
No.
So, yeah.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
The task force by its nature has no delegated authority. Anything it does, recommends or oversees has to be subject always to council approval. Just picking up Councillor Caston's very valid question, one of the big issues in my view for the task force, whether it's this year or in subsequent years carrying on, is to address the big issue of the inequity between access to river pathways on the east side of the city versus the west. The west side is basically well served, and for example, one of the things I'd love to see at some stage is some work done around how on earth could we get a bronze gravel path even from north of Piketty Bridge right up to the K Road area. You know, there's large chunks of the east side that paths are not available. There may be in long term, subject to private philanthropic
Deputy Mayor,
donors.
divert your question to somebody, please.
Well, could the chair of the working party confirm Deputy Mayor Gallagher's point that we need to address the issue of equity between the east side and the west side in terms of access and enjoyment of a major civic amenity?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay, we're moving into debate. Councillor Jeff.
Nothing to add.
Okay, I'd just like to thank Councillor Jeff for picking up the chairing of this very important committee and or subcommittee or task force, and yeah, just thanks for putting your hand up, making yourself available. I know you're busy, but do appreciate it, and I think appointing Tipora as your deputy is very insightful, so well done. Councillor Gary.
I'm supportive of the terms of reference and the work that's going ahead. I just caution all councillors that this is one of our, what I would call icing on the cake rather than the cake type projects. And we have done an awful lot on the riverbank. This, Julie's mayoralty and Andrew's mayoralty in terms of Victoria and the river and the Central Park and all that sort of carry on. And I have been on record of saying that I think this bunch of ratepayers have kind of done enough and paid enough for the river. And this is a generational change we're talking about. And you know, God bless Julie and Andrew, because you've got the thing rolling, because, you know, for decades people have saying we've turned the back of the city to the river and all those sort of cliches, and something is happening now. But we are that close to our debt position that I am really concerned that this is one of the things that I think should, and it's up to every one of you to make your own decision, but that I would consider this as one of the first things we would cut if and when the going gets tough. Because this is not about housing, this is not about key infrastructure, this is the icing on the cake, which is really nice, you really want it, but this is way down the priorities for myself in terms of spending of ratepayers' money.
Councillor Dave.
Yeah, I think something's gone wrong here, because I actually partly agree with Councillor Mallett. But I do think that it's still an opportunity to identify the priorities and to seek alternate funding than ratepayer funding for what those priorities are, at least in partnership level. Plus there is some allocation in the budget anyway. So we shouldn't be stopping doing this. We should at least explore how far the vision goes. And I think as the city's expanding northwards and southwards, that vision is also expanding. And look at what's happening with the Amberfield development. We're able to include things like river walkways and other riverside facilities in those developments at the cost in part of the developers. And I think that's perhaps a failing of past councils that we didn't do that much. So I think let's not just assume every cost that may arise out of this is going to be sheeted home to the ratepayers. I think that's a good way. The other thing I was going to sort of suggest to Councillor Taylor is that, as well as the free CBD parking sign in his car, he could add something about the river path on the car as well. I think that would be appropriate. On the other car, okay.
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm obviously very pleased that the task force has been re-established and that we've now got the river plan document back on track. Obviously, it's I'd say a living document, that there are changes, there are refinements. I think there are some critical issues coming up in terms of where you locate the so-called river centre. Is that art museum based, or is it still at the ferry bank? I think it's quite urgent that we do give the rowing club and some other stakeholders certainty as to direction of travel. I would argue that when people look at Hamilton as a place to invest, live, work, etc., of course they're looking at the financials, but don't ignore the fact that both Rotorua and Tauranga, who are competitor cities in a way, are really ramping up and doing major developments on their waterfront areas. I also want to compliment those who are non-members of the task force in the way in which they came along and participated, and I'm sure that the convener will stress that this is open to all elected members and our Maunga Māori representatives as well, and it was great to see Norm there as well and really participating. So I think there's some really good partnerships, and also want to note which I think Councillor Taylor will stress, is that, some of the stakeholder engagement. I think we've, got to reinvigorate that, and I think that's also a very, very good positive development of this task force. Thank you.
Councillor Jeff.
Thank you, Mayor Andrew. Yeah, I felt I'd better respond there. I wasn't going to say anything, but in response to Councillor Mallett's comments there, the task force is absolutely aware of financial limitations and is being going to be very careful about what it recommends back to this council in regards to that. I think the formation or the reconvening this task force was partly come from the fact that, over the last couple of years, this council hasn't been in a position to advance the river plan in some areas, perhaps as much as some of us would like. There was a very strong public endorsement of the river plan back in 2014, and so I actually feel that there is a strong mandate for this council to continue the work with the river plan, not just for public appeal, but also for the dollars, for the financial benefits that will come ultimately by bringing people to the river, which is where the waterfront, it's our waterfront, people, tourists are drawn to the water as are businesses. And in regards to Councillor McPherson's very good comment about who pays for these things, we've and Te Pora is very strong about this as well. We're very keen to work more closely with the stakeholders, and one of the things that we resolved to bring back to Council on Tuesday was to actually set up a decent stakeholders forum, which would meet once every couple of months, so that the likes of your Embassy Park Trusts, your Tainui, your Momentum, your Waikato Tourism, all these groups can actually feel closely involved right from the outset. Waikato Regional Council, Waikato River Authority, and if we've got them involved right from the start, those partnerships will get stronger, and they will be able to help us in some of these projects financially. Thank you.
Councillor Robb.
Thank you, Chair. Look, one of the outcomes I got from the Tuesday meeting is and I think one of the good outcomes of restoring the river project is that it's an opportunity to plan. I've had real concerns over the last couple of years that we've been doing a few piecemeal projects around the river which haven't really had any planning. And I'm encouraged by Councillor Dave's comments a little earlier suggesting that, one of the outcomes of doing some good planning could be that we can bring some philanthropic money to the table, and that was proven when we did the Ferry Bank plan. No funding, but we had a plan in place, and some of you may remember that that's exactly what brought the Donny Trust to the table with $1 million. I know that the Mayor has talked about some philanthropic money that's out there, and I think for the Central City Park, and in order to bring that sort of money to the table and to bring those stakeholders that Councillor Jeff has talked about, I think we need to have a formalised plan as to what we're going to do there. And I think that will become, and hopefully that will become, one of the priority spends in this next annual plan out of the options in terms of how we might spend from our limited budget around the river plan. So I'm quite optimistic that this is a positive step forward, and one of those outcomes will be a look at the plans that have already been done up to 2014 and the Ferry Bank plan in 2015 and where we actually go from there. Thank you.
Councillor Jeff, do you want to write a reply? Okay, all those for? Any against? Carried unanimously. Item 19, Blair. Yeah, this will be our last item before we stop.
Good afternoon, Your Worship and Councillors. Happy New Year. So the matters in this report today have been the subject of a couple of briefings, but I would just like to remind Council of the context. So the coalition government is certainly focused on a number of growth matters that closely resonate with Hamilton City Council's interests. These include the provision of affordable housing and just housing supply in general, public transport and in particular rail, Three Waters reform, new planning tools to identify new and accelerate transformational opportunities such as the proposed Urban Development Authority, new funding and financing tools that can help us deliver large-scale infrastructure, particularly in an off-balance sheet context, which is relevant to Council, aligned planning between the Crown, councils and iwi, including detailed spatial planning, and also an emphasis on the four well-beings as we develop communities and develop new communities. So progressing these initiatives is a priority of the government, and the Hamilton-Auckland Corridor Plan has been recognised as an area of focus to deliver transformational opportunities. And I guess to also progress the shared interests that I've just talked about, where we can look at areas such as pilot projects or early adopters for some of these new tools that are coming. And over the last 12 months, a team of us have been working with the government, iwi, and our local government partners to prepare a corridor plan covering the area between Hamilton and Auckland. And that plan is going to be considered by a governance group in the middle of this month, on the 15th of February. The plan includes a number of initiatives which are relevant to Hamilton, including a Hamilton-Waikato proposed metro spatial plan, which is essentially the Greater Hamilton that our council has referred to and talked about last year. Initiative to look at Three Waters development, particularly for growth areas, mass transit, particularly in and around the Hamilton and Metro Hamilton area, and the high-speed rail business case, looking at the next iteration of rail beyond that, currently under development. There's huge interest from the government in the Metro Spatial Plan and around the Hamilton area, and many officials from Wellington are making comments such as, this area is the best opportunity in New Zealand for growth development and government investment, which is fantastic. And to see the interest from the Wellington officials in and around the Hamilton area is a tremendous positive to the corridor plan and the initiatives. So the prize for Hamilton, for the sub-region, is that Hamilton's growth over the long term and the growth of the metro area is successful across a range of factors, and that we are not competing with our neighbours in this discussion. We are competing with Auckland and other regions such as Tauranga and Canterbury for the government's attention and the government's funding. So we can develop our community at pace and scale and deliver outcomes proportionally greater than those other areas which are also competing with the government. So obviously all this work is founded on a principle of collaboration, and to continue to collaborate and work together, we need an enduring partnership to support the conversations and discussions and development of all the initiatives in the corridor plan and the work program. It's where we can talk and focus on the strategic issues that matter, but also where we can focus on things such as the new government urban growth agenda, the tools, the initiatives and the programs that are relevant to Hamilton and our near neighbours. The report in front of you today is proposing that we need a growth management partnership, and to utilise and change fundamentally the existing growth management partnership called Future-Proof to become the new growth management partnership to oversee the corridor plan, the metro spatial plan and growth planning across the sub-region. This is seen as faster than starting from scratch because there's a number of processes, procedures, tools that we can utilise and arrangements with, for example, our iwi partners, which are easier to adapt and amend than start from scratch. The changes are outlined in the report, but the significant changes are, most importantly, to invite the government and Auckland Council to join the partnership, and by government I'm talking about at the most senior level government ministers, to also review and change the core foundation documents of the partnership around the terms of reference, the joint committee agreement and the memorandum of understanding, to also review the terms of reference and the procurement arrangements for the independent chair and the independent advisors as they become into their contract period by the middle of this year. And in addition to that, we're also seeking to negotiate with our other partners a name change to the partnership to reflect that it has a new purpose and there are new partners to the table, and also just to amend the way that we intend to work with one of our neighbouring councils, Matamata Piako District Council. These matters will all be considered by the governance group on the 15th of February, of which Mayor Andrew and Councillor McPherson are members. Of course, that governance group has no decision-making ability, and then they will go to the existing Future-Proof Implementation Committee on the 20th of February for further consideration. Finally, Your Worship, there will be a transition period if these changes are accepted and obviously endorsed by all the other partners, and we anticipate that the transition period will take a few months through to the middle of the year as all the terms of references are updated, changed, and of course these are formally ratified by the likes of the government through Cabinet. But certainly my understanding from officials is that the government and the government ministers are very happy with the direction as outlined in my report, and our proposals are consistent with those of the other councils, with the exception of the name change, which is something that Hamilton is raising, and obviously the position around Matamata Piako, but those will be matters that we will then negotiate around the table. So, Your Worship, I'm happy to take questions on the report. Thank you.
Councillor Angela.
Thank you. Thanks for the report, Blair. Can I be confident that as we go through this process, that the needs of our city are not lost against the needs of this current government to deliver their agenda?
No, I think, Angela, Councillor Leary, that our interests are extremely well represented in the process to date, and the partnership to the future will look to enhance our interests rather than. So we have been very successful in obtaining everything that we have been seeking so far, and I think having the Minister around the table, in addition to the existing partners, will enhance our ability to get our interests advanced.
I'd add also at a elected member level, as well as a officer level, bureaucrat level as they refer to us in Wellington, we've done a very good job at pushing forward our ambitions, and it's been well received in terms of what we want out of it, and we will continue to do so. We have, in every step of the way, for major decisions will require intervention from this council to make a decision one way or another, which will put us in a position to actually hold ourselves up against council to make sure we actually are progressing it in the way that needs to be progressed.
So at every one of these meetings, it's the two of you and Councillor McPherson.
So if I look under the proposal, looking to the future, Councillor Leary.
But at the moment, getting to this point though, who's been round the table at every pushing our city's
okay, so certainly the Chief Executive and myself at an executive level, and the Mayor and Councillor McPherson. To date, obviously, it's been developed in a, let's call it an informal arrangement, because there has been no formalised governance, and we're trying to. What we're doing here is effectively looking to conclude future-proof as we know it now. Because the corridor plan has come along, it's the new opportunity for this area, and to utilise the future-proof structure but change it fundamentally so that becomes the new formal structure. And that has a governance level, an executive level, my level, and then a technical level.
This is the first substantive decision to date in terms of creating an official vehicle. Up until now, it's been there's been three significant meetings with the Minister and central government agencies plus other councils, and we've I would say probably driven a big chunk of those meetings. We've been heavily involved in setting the agenda and making sure that it covers the items that we believe are important, not only for Hamilton but also important for the region. And through this mechanism now as well, we'll get continue to have strong advocacy in that space as well.
And all the other, I've read through the report, and there was a letter from the current Future Proof Committee supporting this next step. I think I read that correctly. Fully supportive, actually. So the outcome of this decision today is that does Future Proof cease to exist, and a new governance body is established with a new name. Is that really the essence of the outcome you're seeking today?
That is the essence of the outcome. Obviously, there's a bit of a dance to occur through the steps, but absolutely, yes. Yeah,
okay. And so I was just interested in what Matamata Piako are not around the table. Now, I understand they weren't a future-proof partner, but what was why have we excluded them? What was the rationale for considering their input in the first place?
So mainly to do with Morrinsville and Morrinsville's geographic location to Hamilton and the metropolitan spatial area. And I think the preference, Councillor Leary, is that we engage with Matamata Piako District Council as a key strategic partner, but to have them sit around a formal table talking about growth matters primarily in relation to the corridor and in relation to the Hamilton metropolitan area, when their interests expand to Te Araha, Matamata, is probably unnecessary.
And were they happy with that?
Well, that discussion's got to occur.
Still got to occur.
But
Okay.
I wanted to have Hamilton's position determined on that particular matter, because it was an existing decision of Future-Proof to invite Madam Atapiako last year.
Yeah.
And of course, since that time, the corridor plan has come along. Since that time, we've now got the proposal for the new governance arrangements with the government and Auckland Council coming to the table. I guess from another perspective, we don't want this governance group to be too big and unwieldy, and we want to keep the numbers to a manageable level.
The Urban Development Authority, we still don't really know how, well certainly I've had no information how that's really going to roll out, and it's attracted considerable criticism from the investment industry, from the building industry. This decision today doesn't sign us up to accepting whatever that authority, because I'm actually against that authority, and the last thing we need is more government. So it doesn't sign us up to that, because that work's still got to be done. We've still got to understand what the powers that authority is going to have over the city.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So this I guess provides us with a mechanism by which a number of councils, the government and iwi can talk about that as that proposal for the government develops. Bearing in mind, as you say, it's yet to go through Parliament. Yeah. There's no legislation yet for it. But ultimately, it would come down to each party, each council choosing if they wish to engage with the Urban Development Authority or not, if that does come to fruition.
Okay, so if this is signed off by council today, process will happen with the other councils, etc. The new governance and the new name, whatever that's going to be, I don't really care what it's called, is set up, and then work will start on a draft spatial plan. Will that come back to, because I've seen spatial plans before and they are tremendously large documents, will there be plenty of time for this council to look at that, to critique that, to have fresh eyes over that as we go? Because that's the critical piece of work that is coming out of this, correct?
Absolutely. So the Metropolitan Spatial Plan obviously covers more than Hamilton City Council, but we will have multiple chances for this table to engage in that. In addition, Councillor, the amended terms of reference, the joint committee agreement and the memorandum of understanding that form the basis of the new committee will also come back here for approval. So today I'm just getting Council's agreement that this is the big picture changes we seek. We will go and finalise that discussion with the other partners, agree that, then we'll work on the detailed terms of reference, the detailed memorandum of understanding. That will come back to each partner for formal sign-off as well.
And you're still of the view, final question, you're still of the view that as we go along this process, because spatial plans are very expensive as tools as well, that we are not committing any funding straight off the bat. That will come in as the spatial plan and any other projects that might sit under that over time.
Yes, I mean, I think
we're either in or out at that point.
Yes, we are, and I think to be clear, we already provide funding for the activities of Future-Proof.
Yes, I understand that.
So some of those funds will be utilised to help us develop the spatial plan in terms of the thinking and the work. But ultimately, any decisions around the content spatial plan, what it promotes, would be for council to say yes or no to.
How much do we? Sorry, Blair. How much do we fund Future-Proof now?
It's between $150,000 and $200,000 a year. Okay. I can't be exact on the figure.
And that will that operating costs will just transfer to this new group.
Correct. But I think, again, Councillor Leary, we're at the very early stages of making the transition. We have to, at the first step, get all the partners to agree. Do we agree that we conclude Future-Proof as we know it? Do we agree that we want a new partnership with the government and Auckland Council? Can we transition from Future-Proof to that with all these changes? If the answer is yes, then over the next couple of months we will go and do all the work to make the detailed changes, bring that back to each partner for agreement, and by the middle of the year we should be underway. But meanwhile, the corridor plan is coming to the governance group, the interim governance group, for consideration next week. That will then come back to each council to look at. We also want to start the initial work on the Metropolitan Spatial Plan, because that's what council last year said: we want to develop a Greater Hamilton growth strategy. It is exactly the same piece of work. So we would like to get that piece of work started as well. Because it's in our interest to think about our growth and development beyond our current boundary as we know about it, think about how we plan for the future.
And I think it goes back to the earlier question, Councillor Leary, that you asked in terms about us making sure that we look after the interests of the community of Hamilton, this spatial plan will give us that chance to do that. We'll have really robust data about what our needs and our future is, but it also forces the greater Hamilton metropolitan area, which includes other parts of Waipaha and Waikato, to also acknowledge that future growth aspect as well. So it will help us putting our best foot forward in that context.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. One of the points that Angela touched on to do with governance going forward and the involvement of this council in decision making, at the workshop last week, was it last week? We asked a question about whether the meetings of this new governance body were open, and it was your assumption, I think is probably right, that they were.
Now they are open.
Okay, got a confirmation. Can we ensure that we advise all councillors of when and where those are, including the one next week, and that we hold them, if we're conducting them, or whoever's conducting them, hold them in places that can take other councillors? It's not just advantageous for our council, but I'd suggest for Waikato District Council as well, because one of the things, to be honest, that we've seen there is that the information on some of these growth issues are held in very few hands in some other councils. They don't seem to have the same sorts of discussions around the table that we at least do, even if not everyone's satisfied with them, at least we're discussing them here, but it's not necessarily the case elsewhere, and I'd like to see a wider spread of knowledge amongst other councils.
Thank you, Councillor. I totally agree, and in fact you'll note in the recommendations and also in the attachment, it talks about the meetings, the outcome of the meetings being visible to all the council partners, because some of the council partners probably haven't reported them as well as possible. It talks about the chief executives having a much greater role in terms of presenting information to those meetings. What I would note about the dates, and I'll certainly circulate the dates, is that the meeting next week, we know, thereafter, if the government and the government ministers come to the joint committee meeting, those meetings may have to, the dates may change. Also, the location of those meetings, currently they're in Hamilton, they may need to be in other localities to facilitate a minister or ministers to attend. So we've got to work through that. It may well be that they are closer to Auckland, but we simply don't know that answer. The minister may come to Hamilton every second meeting, the other meeting may be closer to Auckland.
They be open to other...
Well, they are open because they're a formal part of council of local body work.
Yeah, because you just, sorry Blair, you just said the outcome of those meetings to be available, but
yes,
I'm interested in what Dave's saying.
So the meetings are a joint committee meeting, so they are a meeting of all our councils, so they are open. So they have an open agenda and a public excluded agenda. The vast majority of the meeting is open, and any member of the public could attend those meetings. Correct.
Yep.
And I'll ensure you know about them.
A couple of other lines of questioning. The name, I think it does matter a bit, and I think when I'm looking at your point 2B1 on page 3, I think that's fine, saying use the future-proof governance, management and technical model, etc. But then thereafter in 2B, you go on, just call it future-proof, but it's not. You know, our view is not that it should be future-proof for good reasons. One, we haven't had the greatest experience recently with future-proof as an organisation, but more particularly, future-proof describes a sort of an oval-shaped area that never included links with Auckland. Really, this is a corridor between Hamilton and Auckland, and some of us have been loosely using the term H2A. Which sort of describes much more about what it is, and I think that while it's fair to say, look, we're going to use this model, we build on it, we don't have to reinvent all the wheels, etc. We don't want to end up with something just called future-proof again and confuse the hell out of people. So I think we need to make it clear what our view is. Just because the Mayor of Waikato demands that it's be like he says it is, doesn't mean to say that's going to be the outcome. But if we write it like this, he'll think that that's what's going to happen.
So, Councillor McPherson, the reason I prepared the resolutions like that, the ones under 2B were lifted from a position that all councils have taken pre-Christmas apart from Hamilton. If we look at then 2C, so in 2C I've got further recommendations which are Hamilton-specific requests. So effectively saying, in addition to those which you've just referred to, CI, a new name for the partnership to reflect its new focus and participants. So that captures all of what you just said there. So the way I...
But you've got under B, approves.
Yes, approves of that, but then C notes that approval of 2B is subject to the following.
Well, like I said, it's not necessarily the biggest issue, but I'm wary about...
So I think, Councillor McPherson, I completely understand our council's position is that we would like that name to be something other than future-proof, and that's what I'm seeking from this resolution, your endorsement of that position, so then I can take that to the next meeting.
Okay, so that actually goes on to this here. I have a slight concern about how the governance side of this works. It does seem to me, and I ask you to comment on this, Blair, that sometimes the governance or elected member involvement from not just our council but Waikato and Waipa and Auckland as well is a bit of an afterthought, or we better have a meeting of the elected members to give the tick to what we've been doing for the last 4 months, sort of thing. It's not that the work plan is not sort of run past the elected members before it starts happening, and I suggest that this may be driven a little bit by the government officials that are involved, because they have their private meetings with the minister, I'm sure, but basically they get on and just do it. And whereas we operate slightly more differently, more of a partnership between elected members and staff.
Yes, and look, I think, Councillor McPherson, looking to the future, it is a desire that we have more regular meetings of the governance group. We certainly don't want to have meetings cancelled for lack of agenda, because I think that's actually a poor outcome, and that has occurred in the past. We also see that there's a need for more workshop discussions in between meetings as well. Yeah. So I think we absolutely have captured your desire, and that's certainly what we want to achieve.
Yeah, I'm not seeking for a change, just alert people to that potential.
And I think that's something that the terms of reference, etc., can capture as we put the final details around that. Right. Because I certainly agree with you. It has been our successful model to have far closer direction and engagement with the elected members and potentially some of the other participants.
Yep, thanks. And probably just a final question arising out of something Angela asked in terms of the expenditure going forward. It would be correct, would it not, that once this gets going, that projects like Peacock development and the rail service and our rail, including our rail station, and our expenditure in those areas will become they won't be under the charge of that, they'll still be under the charge of this council, but they'll become seen as part of the growth development in this area?
Yes, I think they'd be standalone projects, but I would anticipate that this group would have visibility of those key initiatives where they contributed to the wider outcomes that we're trying to achieve. So absolutely, the examples you cited, I would see that they have some visibility, but they are managed at a detailed level by the particular council.
Right, thanks.
Councillor Robb.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My question is perhaps aimed at both the executive and elected member representation on this proposed group, and that is, how nimble will we be to pull out if it goes nowhere? And I ask this question because for the last 5 years that I've sat around this table, I've sensed, and not having been in the tent, but I've sensed ongoing frustrations with future, future-proof, lost the word, and at times with the mayoral forum, and yet we keep going back there and spending our $200,000 a year as if, you know, there's nowhere else to go. And not only perhaps have we not received information, we've also received third-hand information from some of the other participants there, which hasn't always been accurate either. I mean, this all looks pretty exciting to me, but I also have a cynical side that says, well, you know, how far into the tent should we go? How long should we stay in the tent if it appears that it's really going nowhere? How well can we be in terms of the feedback? And I think Councillor Dave has probably covered some of that in the sense that probably we could go along and attend some of the meetings. You've mentioned it also, Blair, that there was an opportunity for more feedback via our briefings and so forth in terms of what is what is being decided, what is to be decided, so that we have some input in there. So how can we make sure that this is going to be structured in a way that we will get the outcome, not necessarily all of what we want, but outcomes that will be for the good of the city, and we won't get in there and find ourselves continually frustrated by the central government bureaucracy, which is a brand new part to the whole thing, and maybe some same old from some of our other local councils who have, in what we sense, have frustrated us in the past with, not wanting to get on with what needs to be done.
Gosh,
I'm sorry. There's a lot of questions in there.
Look, I think Councillor Pascoe.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
If we just look to the future rather than sort of re-examine the past, this is a fresh start. It's a new start. And what I have certainly seen in the last 12 months working with the government officials and the government ministers, a real desire for pace, agility and transformative thinking. So those will be principles which will really sit close to the new terms of reference as we form the structure. Ultimately, I think one of the lessons we are taking to the future is to make sure, to Councillor McPherson's point, that the work of the officials and the thinking of the elected members is not too far apart. In other words, we keep those two groups very closely aligned and debating the issues. The other comment I would make is that this all relies on good relationships, good communication, collaboration and partnerships. And so the foundation to this is going to be working on those closely and making sure that robust conversations are occurring in a timely manner. Now, if it's not working to our satisfaction, council could withdraw at any time, and of course the partnership would cease to exist. Nonetheless, Hamilton has a lot to gain from successful partnerships with the government, with the iwi, with our neighbouring councils, because ultimately our growth is linking into growth of those areas. So working with all those stakeholders is in our interests, as it is in their interests. But ultimately, I think the way we've structured this, we've taken the lessons of the past. We want to make sure that we have the right advisors with the right terms of reference to do the things that work for the partners, not necessarily have a situation where some of the activities are potentially at odds with some of the views of some of the members. So I don't know if I answered your question there, Councillor, but
it was a long question, but
yeah. Look, I think I can't promise you that this is the final solution, but I'm feeling, based on evidence of the last recent months, that there's a huge opportunity here. The government at the table with the government interests is a big change to what we've had in the past.
I also think that we've got to make sure our expectations, what we want out of this, are clearly articulated. And if we're not meeting those expectations, it comes down to what this group of people on this table want to do. And if you make a decision to pull out, we'll extract ourselves as quick as we can.
Yep. Maybe there's one other part to that, Councillor. We're very lucky that we've done some thinking last year around our desire to develop a Greater Hamilton growth strategy. We've taken that and completely enshrined that into the development of the Metropolitan Spatial Plan, which is a key initiative. So our desire, our outcomes are first and foremost a part of this new initiative. So I think Hamilton has a huge vested interest to get this right. So, and that will then rely on our relationships, both at a governance level and an executive level, to work with our neighbours, work with the government to achieve those outcomes. So we've also got to take some responsibility in terms of how we engage with the partners to make sure this is successful. Because although we're the biggest council, we can't do it without working with the others.
So you're telling me you'll have the courage, and you'll have the courage to come back to us and tell us if the whole, not every individual project, but the whole thing isn't working.
Correct.
Yeah, good. I don't look forward to that, but I hope that if that does happen, we don't just sit in there forever hoping that
and I can't overestimate the significance of the changes that have been proposed here. They may seem relatively small, but they're actually quite fundamental. And there's a lot of discussion going on behind the scenes to ensure we all reach the same position.
Thank you.
So when Dave and I attended the last future-proof meeting and we felt uncomfortable with the speed and the timing and the lack of time we'd had to go over the document and the railroading through of the new document, was that the draft future development strategy? What was that document called?
Well, that was you're referring to, Councillor, sorry, Your Worship, a document which was an update of the existing future-proof strategy, which was required to meet government timeframes by December of last year. So you didn't have enough knowledge or
No, but I'm just asking what the name of the document was.
So it's referred to the future development strategy or draft future development strategy.
Okay, so that's the same document that you're referring to on page 4C, bullet points 1, 2, 3, 4.
Correct.
Okay, so your wording there is just not strong enough, Blair, so I'm going to propose some changes. It's not that bullet point 1, 2, 3, 4, it's not a revision, it's a redevelopment. So I just propose that we change the word from revision to redevelopment. You said yourself that this is a fresh start, a new start.
Sorry, where are you, Mayor?
So page 4.
It's actually also it's actually in the recommendation C2, fourth bullet point.
So C, yep, fourth bullet point.
Yep.
So just change the word from a revision to redevelopment. And same under C on page 4, C in the second line, request the Chief Executive negotiate this redevelopment with the other growth management. So it's a rebuild of the document. It's not tied in with...
The Chief Executive requests negotiate these redevelopments with just...
It's not tied up with the RPS anymore, where bits of future-proof have been cut and pasted and put into the RPS. This is a whole new document with a different strategy. And then at the end of bullet point 4, it needs to say to reflect the above, so that it clearly shows that this is exactly what you said, a fresh start, a new start, and not just a twig or a revision. This is a full rebuild.
Thank you, Mayor. Those are good additions.
Okay. So I'll move this, seconded by Councillor Dave. Councillor Angela?
Sorry, I just had a question on that, though. There will be no, I thought with my questions, there will be no future development strategy.
Well, Councillor O'Leary, this is a requirement of a national policy statement.
Yeah.
And one of the pieces of work that the new committee will need to determine in the coming months will be what exactly do we need to produce to fulfil that? And it may well be the Metropolitan Spatial Plan fulfils a lot of that. So we just don't yet know, and we haven't had a chance to answer that for today.
Okay, all right. Yep.
But certainly there is no desire for myself to replicate, produce multiple strategies. We need to have as few as possible that answer the right questions.
Yeah, all right.
So I guess the next question is, the independent chair at the moment, is he the right person to be redeveloping a document that he has written, that he has had huge input into, which is heavily planning based and legal based, and we know his contract comes up for renewal in June. Is he the guy who should be working on this?
Your Worship, any changes to documents will be done as a team approach, and so at the Chief Executive level we'll be primarily working on those documents. No doubt the Chair will have input into those, but ultimately it'll be a team of us who prepare those, and we'll have a very significant role in that process, and they will ultimately then come back to the governance group to ratify.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Angela, debate. No. Oh.
Yeah, look, thank you. I'm sceptical only for the reasons that while we're focused on someone else's agenda, we're not focused on ours. But I take some warm comfort that Councillor McPherson will hopefully stay involved in this, that what comes with that is that the city's needs for the future will remain prominent and on the table. I've seen him in action. I know that he's more than capable of doing that. I want to support what Councillor Pascoe said in his questions, though, and it's interesting that possibly I've ended up this term switching places with Councillor McPherson, who used to call these things coffee table books. And I am nervous that, like Councillor Pascoe raised, that we will get so far down the track and be so wound up in this that we won't see the forest for the trees, because Future Proof was supposed to be able to deliver all of these things that we're now excited about and we're looking to the future. I know that the actual location and the demographics of the area we're talking about are significantly different, but all of these things Future Proof was sold to us, and it hasn't delivered the things that we were expecting it to. So I am sceptical. I am very concerned about the Urban Development Authority. I've been keeping a close eye on what's going on there, and certainly the financial industry and the development industry are highly critical of that, as am I. But I look forward, I take comfort also from staff saying that at every step of the way this will come back, the terms of reference will come back, so we will see who is on this new group. I have some sympathy with the Mayor's, I don't know if you were suggesting or not, but I kind of think that fresh eyes for a chair might be the right way to go here. It's very difficult to look past work, no matter how independent you might think you are, to look past work that you've been so heavily involved in. So that would be my comment on that as well. But I am comforted that at every step of the way, this will come back to us. And certainly at this point, there's no increase in funding as well required.
Councillor Dave.
Thanks. I'd like to start by thanking Councillor O'Leary for her kind words, and I'll seek them in writing so I can use them in my election campaign. I also might add that the Mayor and myself certainly share your thoughts about the needing a new chair, a new leader as well. And we've discussed that with staff, but you can't. Someone's in the position legally at the moment, so you've got to be careful a little bit about what you say in public. I think the real difference now is we've discovered as a city that just looking at what's within our boundaries is definitely not going to cut the mustard going forward, and that equally we can't just change the boundaries to suit that, much as we would like. It's quite difficult working with our neighbours, working with the government on that sort of front. So we need a plan that goes way beyond our boundaries, that allows us to grow as a city. Forget the boundaries. How do we grow? Should we grow as a city? And this is the vehicle we've seen, particularly because we need to have a good link with Auckland, and therefore with all the things in between us and Auckland, and we recognise the pressure at the south end that's being put on the city by Cambridge especially, and I was down there yesterday. It's amazing the amount of development happening there in a proportional sense, but also Te Awamutu. I've spoken with builders and developers down in Cambridge who say we're actually sort of getting almost maxed out here now. We're looking at moving westwards to Te Awamutu. That's the next place. So that'll be a city of 20,000 quite shortly, I'm sure of that. And all of those pressures are not because Cambridge is a great place to live, work and play, or Te Awamutu is. It's because they want to be where the action is in the central Waikato, which is where Hamilton is, in the centre. But equally, we can't do it alone. We've got to do it with Auckland. We've got to have those connections and links so people and businesses and freight and whatever can move both ways. And that's why I see this as sort of a new animal. Future Proof was developed so we could get the Waikato Expressway built, to be honest. That was the only thing that some of the councils cared about. And it grew a bit bigger than its boots to be honest, without any sort of planned strategy for that. So now we're looking at what's the big picture first, and then what are the components of it. Hopefully this organisation can do that job. But, you know, we need to keep a good eye on it, and I think this council's better than the others for keeping a good eye on what it's involved in. Is it worth staying involved?
Deputy Mayor Martin.
Thank you. Previous speakers have made some very, very valid points. I think this particular body is very much around the, the partnership between central government agencies, DHB, a whole range of players, and obviously taking a regional, sub-regional context. The reference to Matamata Piaka, obviously, what is the role of Morrinsville, for example, in future, along with Tiamutu and Ngarawahia and Cambridge in terms of, settlement and focus of activity relative to Hamilton. That's really important. I think this council and the incoming council does need, of course, to keep a very beady eye on all the various forums that they must add value, and I acknowledge the Mayor's reservations around the Waikato plan, for example, and I acknowledge that we need to keep an eye on that. I acknowledge that we need to make sure even that the Mayor's forum, is playing the appropriate pivotal role in terms of leadership. I think it's really good that all elected members are going to be informed that when this group meets, when, where, and the agenda, so that they can come along as observers. I'd certainly strongly encourage that, so that all of us are, right across the critical issues, because obviously this particular body needs to transcend not just, central governments, and I do welcome and acknowledge that an opposition party, the Nats, are having their big two-day caucus in town today. I think that's positive. But along that line, I think it's really good we keep our 3 Hamilton National Party-based MPs right across what our aspirations are for this group and where we want to go as well. Just as obviously it's really critical that when we have the incoming council, the briefing documents, of course, are thorough, because it's really important that we keep momentum going. Thank you.
So Future Proof was set up around the Auckland to Hamilton new expressway largely, and then they've used that as a tool to keep us involved or to keep our interest in every time it's come up in questions its use. It's been blamed back on NZTA and their money that finance these big projects, and are we really going to break something that I believe's done its job? I believe Future Proof is largely RC Boo. It hasn't done for Hamilton anything around the huge constraints that we have with the highest density levels in New Zealand, more people living here per square kilometre than anyone else by a huge amount, by the fact that our infill rate's so high because we're having to go in, and we haven't got the land and the industrial land and the proper planning in place to plan the city for 100 years. It's great that at last Future Proof is looking like it's dead and finished, and we're starting again, and with a far, far bigger picture with central government support this time on what happens on the H2A corridor. And this is actually an exciting direction. This is having central government involved, having central government saying that this is the biggest growth opportunity in New Zealand. It's time that we let the old go. Using Blair's words, fresh start and new start, and redevelop, change, and set this up as a document that is fit for purpose. So we'll move to the vote. All those for? Any against?
Councillor Mallet dissenting. Sorry. The motion is carried. Councillor Mallet dissenting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back at, are you okay at 2:30 so we can keep the day moving? Is that okay with members? Is that okay with? Okay, 2:40?
2:45, quarter to.
Quarter to?
Quarter to.
2:40? 2:40? 2:40, Leanne?